Thank you. Good afternoon. From Manila, this is Chris Morris. I'm head of the NGO and Civil Society Center, and welcome to everybody who's tuned in for the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2021 for the first of a couple of consultations which are programmed into the Clean Energy Forum schedule. The consultation this afternoon is targeted at civil society organizations, but we also hope we've got some other stakeholders participating. As I said, I'm from ADB's Civil Society Center, and I'd just like to share a few of the ground rules for this discussion and some of the ways that you as participants can join in the active dialogue this afternoon. So the platform that is being used for the Asia Pacific Clean Energy Forum is one whereby it's difficult to bring all participants on and off. We're in complex times, having to carry out these sessions virtually. So what we'd like you to do, if you do have any questions or comments or statements, your viewpoints are important to us, please type them in the chat box. And we'll pick them up from there, and I will help relay those to a series of ADB experts that have joined us this afternoon. So with that, what I would like to do to start off is to introduce the Chief of ADB's Energy Sector Group, Dr. Yongping Zhai, who has been leading the process of review and updating of the ADB's 2009 energy policy. And he's going to start off with a presentation, 10-15 minutes, to share some of the key aspects of the review process and also the contents of a consultation draft, which is up on the energy policy website. As participants to this session this afternoon, everybody should have already been sent a link to that energy policy review website of ADB. And there's also on that website opportunities for you to give comments or to approach ADB to participate more within the overall process. So perhaps Yongping Zhai, could I ask you to start off with the update, whilst anybody with any views, please put comments into the chat box and we'll pick those up at the other end of the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Yongping.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to join this conversation with a large audience. We targeted, as you said, CSOs, but most any stakeholder, the public will be able to join this session and ask questions to ADB directly to me and to my colleagues. I'm happy to see so many of my colleagues from ADB here today. So as you can see on the screen, I'm going to make, as Chris said, the 15 minutes talk on energy policy update. But before that, I would like to start with a little bit of background information on ADB sector operations in general, before I talk about the energy policy update per se. So let me try to, sorry. Sorry. So what we do at ADB, we are guided by ADB Strategy 2030. In this Strategy 2030, we have 7 operational areas, priority areas. So first of all, it's about addressing remaining poverty and reducing inequalities. Secondly, accelerating progress in gender equality. And thirdly, tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience, and enhancing environmental sustainability. And then next one, making cities more livable. Next one, promoting rural development, food security. Next one, strengthening governance and institutional capacity. The last one, the seventh one, fostering regional cooperation and integration. As you can see that energy is not one of these seven, but energy should be contributing to each of these, as we are much more multi-sector oriented. We're going to support these sectors with energy sector operations. In terms of target, we have a target of achieving 70% of our project. Our committed operations will be in the areas of climate mitigation and adaptation by 2030, and we will have a cumulative lending from 2090 to 2030 about 80 billion. Not about 80 billion is our target. We want to be doing more if possible. So next page. I have trouble to make sure. Okay. Our lending in Asia, this chart you can see have been in the level of last year's $4.2 billion, of which $2 billion clean energy investment. So this is in the context of a very difficult situation last year when this pandemic, actually pandemic is still on. We at ADB, we are working from home for over 1.5 years. And it's very challenging situation for all countries, but we are happy to see the energy sector is performing quite well. Renewable energy is showing very strong performance. Some of the utilities, though, are suffering from liquidity problems due to drop in demand and difficulties in revenue collection. And also some of the renewable energy projects in many developing member countries were delayed due to the supply and travel interruptions. So within that background, ADB's energy sector actually doing quite well by lending $4.2 billion, and of which $2 billion in clean energy. I will explain more about this composition. Let me try to get to next page without difficulty. So what's the trick to move to next page? Okay. Yes, I'm talking about $4.2 billion, but how this $4.2 billion is, as part of the overall ADB lending. ADB energy sector lending is about 20% of overall ADB's lending. And within this 24%, you have a clean energy that is 47%, and transmission, distribution, and others 53%. And within clean energy, basically it's renewable energy and energy efficiency. Renewable energy part of 39% of clean energy, and energy efficiency, 61% of clean energy. Okay, now let me, with that background on ADB operations, let me talk about the ADB energy policy review and update process. Since 1981, that was the first time when ADB adopted its energy policy. That was just after oil shocks. So at that time, that securing, making sure that energy security was a priority for many countries. So that was the background for energy, the first energy policy. The second one was adopted in 1995. We recognize the changing needs of development member countries as Asia was progressing. And in year 2000, we did not prepare new version of energy policy, but we did a comprehensive review of the policy and provided some updates through this review. And the latest one, the current one, actually is quite old. The policy is dated 2009, but that time we were already talking about prioritizing energy access, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. So these are the different versions of energy policy, but the latest one is 11 years ago. So why do we need a new policy? It's obvious that the energy landscape is changing. We have seen a very fast declining cost of renewable energy compared to conventional power. Let's take solar PV, for example. Solar PV over the last decade, the overall decline is, it's about more than 80% for sure. Similarly, wind power and other forms of renewable energy also experienced becoming more competitive compared to conventional energy. That's one part of the change. The other one we have to mention is there are more and more new and innovative low carbon technologies that are emerging. We need to consider this, and these technologies would replace the carbon intensive fossil fuels. So we have to consider this development in the technologies. And beyond that, we have a global commitment made in terms of sustainable development goal 7. Here I mentioned universal energy access, but renewable energy and energy efficiency also part of this sustainable development goals number 7. Obviously, we have all countries have adopted the Paris Agreement, and countries issued their nationally determined contributions. And this need to be enhanced, of course, ahead of this year's COP26. And of course, the new policy have to be reflecting the strategy 2030, the 7 operational priorities I've mentioned earlier. So that's the background why we are proceeding with the energy policy review and updating. When we are preparing our support and reviewing this energy policy, we're considering to start with a long-term planning support to our member countries to develop their long-term roadmap and planning for low carbon transition in the energy sector. And this roadmap should have 3 milestones. First one is decreasing the carbon intensity. That's a phase that we need to actually de-link the economic growth and the carbon emission and the energy consumption growth. That's the first step. And beyond that, we need to, one stage reaching the peak in carbon emissions. And from the peak, we have to go to carbon neutrality as we committed in Paris Agreement. And these steps should be supported, should be built within actually in the framework of our national long-term strategies, the climate long-term strategies that would establish sustainable, equitable, low GHG and climate resilient development pathways. So energy sector is not independent of overall climate strategy. And to support this roadmap, I mentioned 3 milestones, but we can also mention 3 sets of technologies to support these milestones. We have low carbon technologies, energy efficiency, renewable energy, we have zero carbon technologies, and we have negative emission technologies, depending the definition. But anyway, these technologies have to be deployed if we want to achieve the milestones in the long-term roadmap for energy sector. And in doing so, ADB will pursue the development of competition and private sector participation through market-based mechanisms. So this is a bit of background and starting point for our energy policy. And more specifically, we are proposing some update and changes in the new policy. As you may have, some of you may have read in the draft energy policy, we are proposing major changes in our position regarding fossil fuels. First of all, ADB will not finance any coal mining, oil, gas, field exploration, drilling activities, basically everything that is upstream of fossil fuel. For your information, in the last energy policy 2009, we were still open to support some of these upstream operations, but now we make it clear, we propose to make it clear that ADB will refrain from financing any of these upstream fossil fuel activity operations. That's one point I want to highlight. Second point, ADB will not finance any new coal-fired capacity for power and heat generation. The reason we highlight the word new, because we want to make sure that ADB can still remain active in supporting decommissioning of old coal-fired power plants, so that we support our countries in early phase out of coal power plants. So that's why when we say that we would not finance new coal, but maybe we are able to support early phase out of coal power plants, early decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. And ADB will support our member countries to develop strategic approaches and policies for a just transition that will address social economic impacts of transitioning away from fossil fuels. Then ADB may consider to finance natural gas pipeline, gas to power, industrial household use of gas projects subject to a number of conditions. Including meeting, these projects should be meeting a basic energy access requirement like SDG 7. This support gas project should be consistent with the long-term low carbon transition plan, long-term roadmap. And this gas project, if we do support, should contribute to lower CO2 emissions, and that is to replace coal applications so that we can lower emissions. And we'll use the best available technologies, most efficient, and we will not support any gas project that are not Paris aligned. That would actually derail countries going forward to meet their nationally determined contributions. And to make sure that our people, our staff understand clearly what is required for supporting gas, we propose to prepare detailed guidance notes to staff, to be issued to staff in processing when they process natural gas project. So this basically our position on fossil fuels. I'm aware that now, given that there's more and more consensus on coal issue, natural gas is very much a center of debate, discussions during this process of energy policy consultation. So that I added one page on natural gas in addition to that page on fossil fuels. We believe that natural gas can still play a role in supporting low carbon transition in developing countries in Asia. So gas can be used when it is consistent with countries' Paris-aligned long-term low GHG emission transition plan in particular, and also Development Bank, multilateral Development Bank Paris alignment framework. And technically, natural gas can, when they replace natural gas project, when they replace coal, there's net reduction in CO2 and also can help improving air quality. And gas can play a role not only for power generation, but gas can be used to support clean energy access for household heating and cooking. And gas can be used very efficiently compared to other fossil fuels. And gas is flexible as a source of power, can be used to balance intermittent renewable energy supply. But in doing so, if we do support, we want to make sure that gas projects are not becoming stranded carbon assets, that we need to prepare even for this gas project exists, that to use new technologies such as carbon capture, storage, and hydrogen, making sure that we are fully consistent with the long-term transition plan, as I mentioned earlier. So this is about natural gas. And we do have a number of considerations. I'm sure these are also part of concerns from CSOs and stakeholders. One of these is large hydropower. ADB will support large hydropower plants selectively, including pump storage. With multi-purpose benefits, with number of conditions. First of all, we make sure these hydropower plants will make a positive contribution to low carbon transition. With a life cycle greenhouse gas emission analysis, we'll consider and we'll incorporate climate resilient designs for this project. Of course, as we do, always do, we will have environmental mitigation strategies considered and proper resettlement, economic rehabilitation of the affected people. For that, we have rules and policy that being also updated on safeguard policy. And we're making sure that our staff understand this requirement. We are also planning to prepare guidance note for staff in processing this large hydropower project. And of course, smaller hydro project will be part of renewable energy we'll continue to support. And there are a lot of discussion also, particularly from CSOs and stakeholders on waste to energy. We will propose to continue to support waste to energy investment, as this investment provide an opportunity for integrated cross-sector project enhancing the livability and health in the cities and rural areas and prevent environmental hazard caused by landfills. And however, when we support such project, we need to consider the right process sequence and technologies when we making sure that when we support this project, waste to energy, we should start with reducing waste generation and waste to landfills first, right? And making best use of ICT technologies and to extract the valuable materials as early as practical in this stage, and also with that we will increase support, increase the integration of waste reuse and recycling. And only on that basis, we may selectively, almost like a last resort, we will support waste to generate energy, usually within confines of planned eco industrial parks, which integrate all these considerations above. And similarly, as we want to make sure that these conditions and these considerations are fully incorporated in project design, so we'll propose to prepare a detailed guidance note to staff when they process waste to energy project. So this is about waste to energy. And in the new draft new energy policy, we propose some other technologies to be deployed. I will start to mention that in the remote and some island nations areas, that we will continue to support hybrid electricity solutions, basically with renewable energy plus storage, with very limited fossil fuel like diesel generators as a backup solution, to make sure that these population in remote areas have reliable energy supply. Before this renewable energy and storage can supply 100% reliable energy. But this stage, we can support limited use of fossil fuels, diesel actually, as a backup solution. And ADB will support our member countries in a series in supporting in series of new technologies like battery storage, carbon capture, utilization storage, green hydrogen, meaning hydrogen based on renewable energy, and also exploring ocean energy. ADB will support cross-sectoral technologies or energy through cross-sectoral approach, such as supporting electric vehicles, that's for transport, solar pumps for irrigation, that's for agriculture, and renewable energy for clinics. And also this time of a pandemic, we can also support cold chain for distribution of vaccines. So we also in the policy, we have reiterated that ADB will not support financing of new technology. This is because even if nuclear energy has made the progress in many ways, so but this is beyond ADB's mandate, ADB's expertise, and even our limited resources, which better focus our support, $5 billion support to our renewable energy as a priority. And sorry, last slide, I would like to show you the indicative timeline of energy policy update. We started the whole process since middle of actually 2 years ago. And we started the technical level consultation. And during this technical level consultation, we have engaged several times with CSOs, NGOs, and many stakeholders. On the basis of that consultation, we also had a consultation with our board members. IBS means here informal board seminar with our board member shareholders. With the feedback received from experts and the board members, we prepared the draft energy policy that was posted online on 7th May this year. And that is the starting point of further consultation when there is a draft energy policy available for you to read and to react and provide feedback, comments, and suggestions. And this is exactly what are we doing right now during the Asia Clean Energy Forum. And we'll have this session today with CSOs and stakeholders, and tomorrow we'll have a moderated panel discussion with the energy experts tomorrow on energy policy as part of energy policy consultation. And this consultation is not limited with this form of virtual meetings between ADB and stakeholders. We are also open to receive written suggestions, comments through web-based system that will be shared, that can be shared here with you. And we're open to receive comments until end of this month so that we can prepare the next draft policy for the board of direction to consider. I hope we will have the new updated energy policy approved in the last quarter of this year. And very hopefully prior to COP26. So as ADB's contribution with very strong position on these issues I have mentioned, and also supporting our countries in their long-term energy transition. With that, I would like to hand back this floor back to Chris, who will moderate the questions. I'm here to answer your question, and also I'm supported by my colleagues from ADB. There's quite a number of them here with different expertise. So depending on question, we can ask colleagues to come in to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yong Ping, for a rapid update and run through of the review process of the energy policy, why it's needed, And there's clearly a lot of discussions going on externally, particularly this year. So it's very timely with the COP26 coming up, as you mentioned, and your references to Paris alignment. You took us through the ADB's own strategy 2020, why we're doing the policy review, the timeline, which we still have on the screen for the review, your last slide, and some of the long-term planning support that ADB is giving to our member countries throughout Asia and the Pacific. I found it interesting how you talk about low carbon, zero carbon, and negative emissions. Maybe we'll get some questions on that. I see we have something like 60 or 70 people online. Can I remind people we don't have a, yes, we're starting to get some questions coming in. Can I ask people to put your name and your organization if you're willing to share that with us, or if you would like to, together with your questions in the chat, and I will pick them up and share them with Yongping and his team. There's one question related to from Wajahat Nassar that states he understands ADB is making fossil fuel technologies redundant, and it should also make sure that push factors must be eliminated for this in every member country. So perhaps if I'm interpreting the question correctly, maybe Yongping, you could expand a little bit on the internal and the external pressures on the energy transition to a clean, reliable, zero carbon energy, and some of the internal challenges that some of our member countries have in making that transition, and how ADB is involved in advising there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I also thank you for this question. I think it's from Wajahat Nassar for asking this question. I will answer first part of this question from my perspective, and I will give early warning to my colleagues who are working in the operations to provide region, country-specific examples and things we are doing in this context to answer this question. I will ask for that purpose. I'll ask Shannon to prepare. What's your take on, in responding to these questions and related to this in Mongolia, for example, what will be the practical way of helping the country in moving, supporting more renewable energy and reducing reliance on fossil fuels? That's one example. And also ask Toru Kubo, I'm sure you are also here, to give examples on things you are doing and to support Southeast Asian countries in moving away from fossil fuels. And Mr. Priyant, I'm not sure Priyanta is here, but anyway, if he's here, we can also ask colleagues from South Asia to provide some examples on things ADB is doing in that area. And Sohail Hasni can also provide examples in Central and West Asia. So I have been allocating roles. Hopefully you can prepare a bit of your answers as I'm answering the question in general. To start with, I think to be fair, to start with, that Asia has made great progress in its economic growth and poverty reduction, and also energy access. I worked in other continent as well, and Asia has been making great progress in these areas I just mentioned. However, if you look at this, the driving forces of this progress from an energy perspective, much of this progress has been supported or reliant, depending on fossil fuels. And for example, that 60% of power generation is coming from coal And Asia's coal consumption is like 77%, close to 80% of the worldwide energy coal consumption. So, and there are still some coal power project in the pipeline in Asia. So in order for us to move away from fossil fuels, the challenge is much bigger in Asia. It's more challenging in Asia than other places. Let's acknowledge that part first. I think as I mentioned in my brief presentation, we want to approach this reducing this dependence on fossil fuels in 3 steps. First of all, we must reduce the energy intensities of whatever energy we use. We must making sure that we use energy most efficiently. So energy efficiency is the starting point. Secondly, we must making sure that we replace the fossil fuels with low carbon technologies, renewable energy. And even that, it may not be enough to reach carbon neutrality. For example, some industrial process, some sectors are very difficult to decarbonize. In that regard, we may need some carbon offset technologies to make sure that we reach carbon neutrality. That's why I mentioned carbon negative emission technologies. We need to deploy all these technologies in Asia to make sure that eventually we can reduce and avoid and eliminate fossil fuel technology. I think that the very broad answer to this great question, good question. I would like to ask Shannon to start with a difficult case. I always use Mongolia and some similar countries as an example, the challenges of moving away from fossil fuels, but also opportunities for us to support low carbon and renewable energy solutions through many ways. Shannon, please.
Thanks very much, Youngping. So I could not agree more that Mongolia is a really challenging case, but I think that a lot of our countries where they don't have domestic fossil fuel resources, it's easier to transition them off fossil fuel use. But in the countries where we're working, where there are abundant fossil fuel resources, be it gas, oil, or coal, it can be more challenging for renewables to be competitive. In the case of Mongolia, there are additional challenges in that the economy is not very diversified. So more than 20% of Mongolia's GDP is attributed to export of coal. And so there's a lot of sovereign risk associated with the domestic coal production and its export. And that risk is ever more prominent with all of its regional neighbors announcing net neutrality goals, which will decrease the demand for that coal. So ADB is trying to help a country like Mongolia in a lot of different ways. So, first it's helping make sure that there's increased diversification of the economy, setting up something like a future heritage fund. So some of those coal revenues are invested appropriately. Also looking at exploring and promoting renewable energy power export to the region that could replace some of the revenues from coal export. And then at the same time, we're looking at how we can decarbonize the domestic energy use. So right now, 93% of Mongolia's domestic electricity supply comes from coal. So even though we have, am I still on? Yeah, okay, sorry, yep. My screen just changed. It was all very alarming from where I sit, but I'm still going, so okay. So looking at how we decarbonize the domestic energy use as well, and power is far easier. But when you're in a country like Mongolia, where you can reach temperatures of 40 below Celsius in the wintertime, heating is not a nice to have. This is a need to have. This is a lifeline service, and it's not so easy to replace it. So of course, we are providing technical assistance. We are piloting technologies that have been deployed in other cold climates, but the geology is different, the climate is different, and so it's going to take a while to learn. So again, we're investing in clean energy. We're helping diversify the economy. We're promoting new technologies, and all of that in aggregate, I think, is needed to help move this away. And then you bring in skills, you link the health benefits to air pollution improvements, and it's really a multifaceted approach, rather than just turning off the spigot and putting them in a really challenging situation. So I'll go ahead and stop there. And I guess we'll go to maybe Toru next. Thanks very much.
Toru, please. Yeah.
Yes, hi, thank you. I think it's an excellent question and a point, and Yongping and Shannon already provided comprehensive answers. I think it's quite similar in Southeast Asia, and the reliance on fossil fuels in the many countries that we have, the ASEAN countries in particular, are very high. And there are very interesting dynamics, quite encouraging. You've seen, well, many of us have seen the rapid uptake of clean energy in countries such as Thailand, and most recently in Vietnam, with 9 gigawatts of solar coming on stream in the past 2 years. It's really remarkable. And Indonesia is now really shifting and revising their 10-year electricity business plan to raise the share of renewable energy. But that said, it's real. There are push factors, and as Shannon said, we are taking a very comprehensive approach to this. Many communities depend on the industries, and many workers also, for the power plants and also for the fuel supply business. And we have to be very conscious of that. And this is one of the reasons why ADB and the MDBs, we are firm supporters of the just transition concept and approach, because we are a development organization. We need to make sure that we have support for the communities that will lose out from this transition. And so while we are making the case for a transition to cleaner energy sources, we proactively identify the communities that will be affected, and trying to promote job opportunities and skills trainings for those communities, so that there's a gradual decline, of the push and more of the pull factor into clean energy. One of the things that is really making our work easier is the rapid cost decline in both the supply technologies, but also storage. And the decline in storage is key, because a lot of our countries in Southeast Asia, the grids are fragmented. We have a lot of archipelagic countries, and without the grid integration, or for the fragmented grids, without the storage capacity, you have problems scaling up variable renewable energy. So our counterpart countries, or developing countries, always say that you cannot compare fossil technology with clean technologies. They're not apples to apples. But with investment in grid and storage, you would start to reach the apples to apples comparison. So one thing is that we are looking at the comprehensive sort of cost comparison picture between the power generation options that they have right now, and then what would it look like with variable renewable energy storage and grid. The second one is to help the countries create markets so that private sector can come in to the grid and in storage space. So I cannot cover all the aspects, but let me just pause here. If there are further questions, I'm happy to answer. I'll hand over to Sohail. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this question. My colleagues have covered most of the issues, but I also want to highlight in the context of Central Asia. First point, ADB is not making fossil fuel redundant. That was the first part of the question. We are helping our client, helping them, enabling them to take advantage of what Toru just mentioned, the renewable energy. Prices are coming down. We want to help them with the new technology, whether it's storage or electric vehicles or renewable energy, to make their meeting their Paris commitments. Because today, in most cases, building a coal plant is more expensive than renewable energy options. So we want to help our countries to reduce their dependency on fossil fuel in a sort of like a gradual way, but at the same time, we want to make sure when they buy the technologies, they leapfrog tomorrow's technology and go to day after tomorrow's technology. And we want to help them with the things that Shannon mentioned in terms of capacity building, technology, and everything else, because we want to also don't want to invest as a bank into an assets that will become useless tomorrow. Like we see a lot of DVDs sitting there, we don't use them anymore. So we also have to make sure. But at the same time, the point that Shannon mentioned is very important. If you are in a place like Astana or Mongolia, minus 38 or 40 degrees, very cold, you can put your tongue out and you can feel the cold in the air. But at the same time, you know, if that power station stops, we'll all be dead. So that's why we have to gradually phase that in, especially my clients in Central Asia. They are fossil fuel rich countries. They also made a commitment in Paris Agreement. They also want to move out, but they are relying on us, our policy guidance, so that that transition happens slowly. They want to make the right decision. So if what we want to do, that if we want to build a project in rural Afghanistan, we look at renewable energy as a first solution, rather than saying, yes, it's always been done diesel, it's always been done this way. Can you look at our alternative? So broadly, the objective here is we want to be able to help our client, and different clients at different levels. Some are producers, some are users of fossil fuels. And as Toru mentioned, it's a sort of justification. We have to do a just transition, and one size may not fit for all. So that's my comment. Thank you very much for the question. Back to Chris.
Okay, thank you. And very, very interesting having the regional views from our energy specialists in Shannon who covers Mongolia and East Asia, Toru Southeast Asia, and Sohail in Central Asia. And maybe that's a segue to a general question, which is on everybody's mind in this year. Would be, where is ADB's overall energy policy going in terms of our support to Strategy 2030 and the commitments there on climate, and 2021 with COP26 coming up the end of the year. We've heard of Paris alignment. What does that actually mean? Is it in terms of 1.5 degrees? Is it, are there other factors in there? What does ADB envisage will go into the energy policy in terms of the alignment and the other initiatives related to climate that ADB is very much involved in because of our climate change commitments. Maybe Yongping, if you could start off. I do recognize we have some of our climate specialists also in the room. This is a general area that civil society has been very interested in terms of the this important year in terms of the Paris alignment.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think this is a great set of questions that complement this our energy colleagues discussed a little bit earlier, and this is the right time to invite colleagues from climate group to elaborate a bit more on the climate actions, climate policies within ADB. Related to Paris alignment, for example, and also just transition. Maybe we can ask a question to start and be followed by Kate from a climate group.
Yeah, thank you, Yongping. So maybe in terms of Paris alignment, this is of course an agenda of the bank that has high priority and is very much connected to what we do in the energy area, but it also goes beyond that, of course. So while there is a connection, it's a separate work stream. ADB has, together with the other MDBs, announced its ambition to become Paris aligned. That was 2-3 years ago. And we have since then, with the other MDBs, worked on a common definition and framework of what that means. And are now working in ADB on determining how we implement that internally. What we agreed among the MDB group as the Paris alignment framework. The framework consists of 6 building blocks. Building blocks 1 and 2 are the alignment with the mitigation and adaptation goals of the Paris Agreement. Building block 3 is about enhancing ambition and scaling up climate finance. Building block 4 is about policy engagement and country support. Building block 5 about reporting, finding a common language on reporting, and building block 6 is about our internal alignment of our internal activities. So at ADB, we do see Paris alignment very much as something that we want to support countries to enable them to make their contributions to achieving the Paris goals, both on the mitigation and on the resilience side. And at the same time, strengthening countries, for example, climate plans, long-term strategies, nationally determined contributions, will also enable us to further mainstream those climate-aligned development pathways into our ADB programming. We will continue, of course, with our ambitious climate finance targets to keep ramping that up. Our target is 80 billion until 2030. And that target is in place, and we're working towards achieving that. I think the climate finance numbers of last year will be released very shortly, and picking up despite the COVID situation. And then as the last step, really, once we have been able to mainstream climate or Paris-aligned agendas into our operations, would be to assess our operations project by project when they come to approval on whether they can be considered Paris-aligned. And that is Paris-aligned means aligned with both the adaptation and the mitigation goals of the Paris Agreement. This preparatory work is ongoing. We are piloting the approach internally, and we do expect that ADB would announce a target for this, the target year and the format of the target well before the COP26 this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Kate, was there anything you wanted to add?
Thank you. So just to come in with a little bit more detail on the just transition and the work that ADB is doing in this area. My colleagues mentioned, how it's a key part of any transition discussion. The concepts enshrined in the Paris Agreement and forms a key part of ADB's work in terms of supporting countries to contribute to the goals of the Paris Agreement and pursue these transitions. It's a really multi-dimensional issue, and it needs to be looked at on many levels. First step is the immediate community impacted by the transition, both in terms of those employed, their families, as well as support industries, and those indirectly affected, shops, commercial enterprises in fossil fuel communities. But then we also need to look beyond that, both in terms of geographical scale, as well as over time, and look at how countries are preparing on a macro level, preparing their societies for transition, preparing their education systems for transition, as well as looking things like intersectional issues. So how would a just transition intersect with issues of gender equality or other vulnerable groups? Another key part really is to start looking at the opportunities. A just transition is not just about managing the potential impacts of moving away from fossil fuels, but also ensuring that countries are looking to maximize the opportunities that such a transition might present in terms of new skills, new jobs, and new income streams for people. From ADB's perspective, as part of the joint MDB group working on Paris alignment, we've made a commitment to support just transition. And we've been working together on common principles to frame our approach to just transition, which we expect to publish in the coming months ahead of COP26. Within ADB, we have a cross-thematic and sectoral working group, recognizing that it's a really multi-dimensional issue, and even if transition is the cause of it, that the solutions need to come from many different groups within ADB. And we're looking at it both from the perspective of ensuring just transition associated with ADB's own activities, as our colleagues mentioned, and also how we can proactively start to support countries with transition planning, with looking at labour policies, with looking at plans as part of the whole transition discussion. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian and Kate, for sharing how some of the energy policy work, which as Yongping indicated in his earlier presentation, is responsible, the energy sector responsible for a significant amount of ADB's funding at 20%, fits into some of the global challenges of climate change. I'm going to bring the discussion back to some of the areas that civil society has been particularly focused on over the last 9 to 12 months, as there's been a series of deep dives into various subsectors of the energy policy, or areas that ADB traditionally invests in. One of them that has I think is probably fair to say has attracted some diverse groups and also diverse views on whether ADB should be investing in this subsector or not, is the waste to energy area. And we have one of our waste to energy specialists, although I think after the last 6 months, he's probably going to redefine his title. And perhaps I can invite Steve Peters to share a little bit more about the discussions and what role he has and the role that he sees ADB playing in the waste to energy field. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming across clearly.
Terrific, fantastic. My apologies, there's a big thunderstorm coming in where I am at the moment, so I might get a bit of dramatic effect, the gods talking to us from on high. You're exactly right. I was hired to help ADB make sense of what is going on in waste to energy. And it's been a very interesting 3.5 years thus far, because there's a number of diverse activities that were going across the bank, notably from the private sector group funding companies doing waste to energy in China and Vietnam. And then also activities doing biogas in India, activities doing cattle manure to biogas to compressed natural gas to make a bus line competitive or bus line financially viable in Karachi. And then things like a large waste to energy plant, which was large by size of the percentage of waste in a remote Pacific community. And the general theme, there didn't seem to be a general theme. And we spent quite a deal of time trying to figure out, what is a consistent story that ADB is going to propagate across its lending and across its departments? And how are we going to make sense of what we've done thus far and put limits on things that we're not prepared to do? And I'll give you an example. I was approached by one particular group to do a look at a project which was for a city that had, let's say, 1,000 tonnes a day of waste, and they wanted to build a 1,200 tonne incinerator. And that was just simply a disaster because it was too big. It would have locked the community into using that technology. It would have locked the communities around it into using that technology. It would have been a drag on budget for the city and for the nation. And it also would have locked out a whole bunch of activities that would have been not only more environmentally friendly, but they would have produced jobs, they would have produced community cohesion, they would have produced a range of activities which would broadly be classed as beneficial development benefits. So so the next thing we did was we went back and said, no, we're not prepared to support it. It's too big. And I think the strategy is wrong. And over time, and with discussions with particular people, that project turned around, and it was the proposal was greatly reduced. And that led us to providing some background on what do we think is a right size if we were to do this at all. To put this in perspective, we have certain DMCs who are very keen on waste to energy. When I mean waste to energy, I mean thermal incineration with advanced gas cleanup. I don't know if you heard that thunder, but there you go. It's a bit of dramatic effect. And then we have other countries that are not asking for it. So what we think is that we released a handbook last year which talked about a range of interventions and a range of pathways that DMCs can follow. And it's been pretty well received. We've got callback from a couple of countries in Southeast Asia who we're advising. And we're not advising them to do big waste to energy plants. That's not what we're advising. So if you were to define my job, I am the guy who's saying to countries, don't do big waste to energy plants. That's my job. So what are we looking at doing? Well, so far we've got about 30 potential interventions, and Dr. Jai mentioned a few of them, like using ICT and using recycling and all those sorts of activities. And we've broadly broken it down into a methodology that's easy for people to follow. So what we start with is the waste hierarchy. And the waste hierarchy first starts with just reduce the amount of waste that you create. The next thing is figure out how to recycle it. Then if you can't, what you can't recycle, how do you recover that either as a resource or as energy? Not necessarily energy only. And then the final portion is disposal. So we figured out there are about 30 interventions in that group, and we've broadly broken them down into about 10 important interventions. And we're just preparing some documentation to use that for training. That's not fully completed yet. And I must thank some of the folks from the CSOs who've given some really good feedback and some really good comments. Notably the need for a taxonomy that could be agreed and discussed so people could then turn around and say, well, we like this, but we don't like that. Notably, CSOs have been extremely negative on thermal incineration. Even with advanced gas cleanup to international standards, they're vehemently opposed to it. But they're also raised specific objections to chemical recycling for the use in fuels, and notably in large-scale plants. So scaling down from the oil industry down to, down to a plant that might do 1,000 tonnes of waste a day. Now, so what we've done is we've created a preference list going from the most beneficial activities we can see that can be done to those activities which are, well, at the bottom of the list are just outright banned. But there are, we're going to have to get rid of the waste somewhere. Now, we can stick it in a landfill and hope that technology comes in to break down waste and do that in the next 5 to 10 years. And yes, there are some promising technologies, but they're not commercialized yet. And we don't know they're just like chemical recycling. We don't really know what the impact's going to be. So we're of the view that if you can right size a waste to energy plant, and when I mean right size, I mean no more than 30 to 40% of your waste a day, unless you're in a really remote community or you're in a really built up city. and then looking at how you might put that facility in an eco-industrial park so that you can use all the materials that come out of it, use all the energy that comes out of it, but more importantly, make it easy for people to take things from that waste stream and use them in other things. For instance, polystyrene, turning polystyrene into knuckles for packaging. Now, polystyrene should be banned at some stage, and countries are moving towards that, but we still have the material legacy in our supply chains. So to say that we need to ban something outright is, in my view, I think is not looking at the wider picture and not looking at the options. If you were to really go down to what is the essential conflict for waste to energy thermal plants, the essential conflict is, do you burn them and reduce their quantity and reduce the carbon impacts from transport, but you create materials in the fly ash which require additional treatment and additional handling and are potentially dangerous? Or do you put something in a landfill, know that it's going to burn in the landfill? And I can tell you from my experience going to landfills all over Asia, many of them are on fire underneath the ground. Also, that breaks down into microplastics, which ends up in the water supply. And a lot of landfills, I'm being euphemistically using the term landfill. World Bank estimated that 93% of the landfills in Southeast Asia, or in Asian countries, were actually dump sites in 2016. And what I mean dump sites is they just dump the material there. When a flood comes, it flows into the river. It breaks down, it catches on fire when it's at the landfill, which is even worse than incineration because that's an completely uncontrolled combustion. So how do we make a decision about that? How do we say what's good and what's bad? And the position that we're taking is that if you can guarantee or you can better provide sanitation to the cities and the countries you're working in by using these facilities, then that is a positive outcome. But if you're looking at these facilities purely and simply for energy, you are completely wrong. It is not an energy equation. Just to put it in perspective, in the developed world, the revenues from a waste to energy plant are 75% from the gate fee and 25% from energy sales. In developing world, it's about 50-50. But we're just of the view that, especially in some countries in Southeast Asia where there's an enormous amount of food waste, you're better off taking that food waste out closer to source. You're better off creating jobs for people, but you will still have stuff that you can't get rid of. And if you want to bury it, then you run the risk of all the issues I've talked about. Or do we burn it in facilities to make sure that we have some form of sanitation? And the decision, there was a comment made in recent consultations saying that we were promoting waste to energy. That is fundamentally incorrect. We are not promoting waste to energy. What we are saying is we are promoting a supply chain which is comprehensive, as low carbon as possibly can be, and addresses a range of issues which are not just related to carbon and Paris compliance, which are Paris Article 2 alignment, which is very important, but also a range of other issues, including sanitation, health, and creation of jobs. And one of the things that was raised was zero waste communities. And there are some fantastic zero waste communities around the world. There's a couple of good ones in India, some fantastic ones in the Philippines. San Francisco, for all intents and purposes, is a very large zero waste community that's managed at an industrial level. But those are few and far between because it requires a great deal of community cohesion and it requires a great deal of community engagement. And not all countries and not all communities can do that. If we could do it in every location, we would, and we wouldn't need waste to energy. But the fact remains, we cannot do it everywhere. But should we support those communities and should we showcase those communities? Absolutely. So Chris, when we talk about waste to energy in the energy policy, there's a perception that it's about energy. It's not about energy at all. Waste to energy is just, the energy is just part of a way of doing something else, achieving other aims. So that was my position. I've got a presentation I'd love to show you, but it's not ready yet. But you might want to, do you want me to talk about the guidance note or not yet?
probably not. I'm conscious that we're a little bit short of time, Steve. So
Okay,
maybe
no
just
worries.
make a quick reference to that, and because I know there is more on the website.
Yeah, well, the guidance note's being prepared, and we're in discussions with some of the CSOs, and we thank them for their positive feedback. And for us, it's actually been very useful. I don't think that we'll agree on a final position. There'll be agreement on that, but I think that we need to do something that is for the benefit of our DMCs, and our view is a well-sized, well-engaged waste supply chain is to the benefit of our DMCs. So I'll leave you with that, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's on the guidance note for waste to energy. That's a valuable sort of segue to another area where this civil society organizations have been very much involved in sharing their views and commenting on the energy policy, as they have, as Steve rightfully points out on the waste to energy debate, is back to fossil fuels. Yongping, you were very clear in terms of your introductory presentation that ADB was not going to invest in new coal. But in terms of gas as a fossil fuel, I would say there have been certainly many discussions, not only with civil society, amongst many of ADB's stakeholders, and I know this discussion is going to continue. One of the areas that I've heard you talk well on, and perhaps you could share a few more details, is and possibly bring in our regional energy colleagues again, is the potential sort of pipeline and how stepping away or changing ADB's policy or approach to gas would affect our member countries and the energy mix within the region, and under what sort of conditions would we or ADB continue to finance gas as a fossil fuel moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm very much aware that this gas issue is part of the key interest of civil societies. I'm very happy to come back on that. For that, I would talk about what I see in the short and medium term role of gas, and what I see beyond this short and medium term, what will be future of gas from my perspective, and what will be the ADB's role. And between this, the current and future, there'll be a tipping point that the other indicator would appear, that is the price of carbon. So I would like to prepare my colleague, not from regional department for this one, but from Dr. Nam, who is expert in many ways on this carbon price, and how this ADB is preparing update the shadow price within ADB, and how that would affect ADB's operations. But before that, Nam, please prepare first yourself. Let me talk about the gas current and future first. So what I see that ADB support in natural gas will be limited in two ways. Limited in its scope, where we would support a gas project. So, for example, that we will not support a gas project when the country has plenty of gas project already, and we don't want to build a greenfield gas project that just adding on more emissions. But we'll be willing to consider, if a country is considering use gas-fired power plant, combined cycle, a good technology that will replace the coal-fired power plant, then we are open to consider. So we're very clear in defining the scope of our support in that regard. So a gas project in Sri Lanka, we may be able to consider. A gas project in, say, in Thailand, for example, is a little bit difficult for us to consider. We have to look at the full picture. So that that's one dimension. but gas support also limited in time. We are mentioning gas has a role to play in transition. By that, we mean that gas has its role to play in the short and medium term. And we'll see beyond this, what would be our position in gas. A lot of people have commented on our draft policy in terms of gas and the conditions there, whether they are too tough or they are too loose. There are different opinions. But some people may have not noticed that in the last paragraph of the draft proposed draft energy policy, we say that we are ready to review this energy policy regularly. Within next 5 years, we can do that. And by that time, there'll be a lot of changes. Renewable energy will become even more competitive. And renewable energy, that's one. And also the cost of carbon may come in. The carbon price will become so high, there's no point to finance a gas project is stranded on day one economically, before even we talk about carbon emissions. So that's as a consideration we want to consider. And beyond the short term, medium term, before I ask Dr. Nam to talk about comment on carbon price, I would like to mention that gas, our support in gas pipeline, gas network, is also a way to prepare us in some ways, if we can prepare our countries appropriately, that when hydrogen can be produced from gas using carbon capture and storage. And that is a blue form, a blue hydrogen. And that is not fully zero carbon hydrogen, but it can be a low carbon hydrogen, preparing, because we need gas hydrogen infrastructure, application of gas, so that we can prepare our countries in future to adopt more broadly in a larger scale hydrogen. But we need to prepare our countries, starting with possibly some green hydrogen, and possibly even mixing the hydrogen with gas in the current pipeline, and trying to see how this our support to this process will prepare when renewable energy becoming sufficiently low cost, becoming sufficiently low, more competitive, then renewable energy can be used to produce low green hydrogen that is close to zero carbon hydrogen. So for that, we need to prepare our countries. I see, in a way, gas can play even a bit of that role in the longer term. But I think there is an economic trigger between this short, medium, and longer term, and that is the level of carbon price and what role the carbon price can play in ADB and in developing countries and in the choice of technologies. And that's something I would like to ask Dr. Nam to give a little bit of background of what are we doing with the shadow price in ADB first.
Thank you, Yangping. Yes, how we see the carbon price is let me start with or the ADB is all the operation departments of the investment projects. In the operation manual of ADB G1, which states clearly that one of the conditions that any investment project, any project investment, it will require the economic due diligence, and that has to be economically efficient or viable. So we are using carbon price to the main, to all investment projects the ADB is doing, including the energy sector, but also the other infrastructure and other projects as well. And then how we are setting the carbon price is that's why that we are putting in, particularly that is the interest from any of the infrastructure investment projects. So since the carbon price and carbon market is not, there is no specific carbon price. So we are using the shadow carbon price, the shadow price. So this is our terminology, which is the social cost of carbon. So this is social cost of carbon in the ADB exercise. What we do is in the ADB is that it is applied to the all sector, not only the energy sector, to conduct the economic due diligence, so to say cost benefit analysis, to see whether this investment project is economically efficient. So how are we setting this social cost of carbon is practically based on the the marginal damage cost to the environment of the CO2 emissions, so to say, and it is all the greenhouse gas emissions is also converted to the carbon units. So, and then based on the fifth assessment report of the IPCC scenario that we are applying per year in the real growth of the 1 to 3%, and ADB is adopting the 2% annual real growth of the 2%. So based on the margin of it, we have the 2016 when we established this social cost of carbon, which was the $36.3 per ton of CO2 equivalent. And then ever since that, we are revising it. And then just last week that we came, and in 2020, we are using the social cost of carbon ADB-wide for all projects, for all sector, we are using $43.2 per ton of CO2 emissions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yongping, for sharing a little bit more on ADB's approach, and crystal balling perhaps a little bit into what may happen in gas in the region, and my colleague Nam for the important issue in terms of the it's not only carbon and the environment which is driving some of the issues around our energy policy and the use of various technology, but it's also very much driven by the economics of the alternatives. So thank you for sharing that. I'm conscious that we're just a few minutes away. Yes. From the end of this session, there's no more direct questions. So I'm going to take this opportunity for thanking all of our participants for joining us today. I do hope that we've from ADB's side, myself and the colleagues have been able to share a little bit about the what is, as you've seen from the tip of the iceberg today, a very complex area that ADB is working with our member countries in, particularly in the current context of the environment and climate change, and with respect to energy. And as we've heard, Asia Pacific is unique in terms of the development requirements and also the community requirements, and that energy is not only electricity but also heating in some of our more extreme environments. So thank you, Dr. Yongping Zhai and your colleagues from the bank. I would like to point out to all the participants here today that the Clean Energy Forum continues for the rest of the week. I've just been having a look at the agenda again to remind myself. There's some very interesting spotlight sessions. There are regional sessions if we've got members of civil society who are particularly interested in the regional energy issues. Please join those. thematic sessions, and also a series of interesting side events. So a week packed full of discussions, presentations, technologies, lots of insights from experts joining us this week. And I'm very pleased that civil society has been able to come online and participate today. I do encourage you to have a look at the Energy Review website, and there are links there for your contributions. And if there's anything you need further information from, please don't hesitate to communicate directly with us through that website, or me from Chris Morris from the NGO and Civil Society Centre at ADB. Thank you everybody for joining, and I wish you all a safe and healthy continuation the rest of this week, wherever you may be across the region. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.